Denny Hamlin looked NASCAR dead in the eye and said he wasn't getting in the car. Not with those brakes. Not at Iowa Speedway. Not with a wall waiting to meet him head-on if things went wrong again. And according to Hamlin, the sport's own officials responded by threatening to invent a punishment on the spot just to make sure he didn't get his way. That's not a rumor. That's not a fan theory floating around social media. That's Denny Hamlin, in his own words, describing a holler conversation that nearly blew up before the Iowa Corn 350 even started. It began on Saturday, when Hamlin's number 11 Toyota hit the track for practice and the brake pedal simply stopped doing its job. He didn't have consistent pressure. One lap it was there, the next it wasn't. Crew chief Chris Gale knew right away this wasn't a minor tuning issue, this was the kind of problem that could end a race before the green flag even dropped. And Hamlin wasn't alone in it. His Joe Gibbs racing teammate Chase Briscoe was fighting the exact same symptoms, and so was Riley Herbst over at the Alliance team, 2311 Racing. 3 cars, 3 crews, all scrambling through the garage trying to find a fix before Sunday. Here's the detail that made this more than a bad day for one team. The other major Toyota organization at the track, Legacy Motor Club, had 0 brake issues. None. Their car chief said it plainly before the race even started. Joe Gibbs Racing and 2311 were simply running a different package than everyone else. That's the whole story in one sentence. This wasn't the track being unforgiving to the entire field. This was a specific setup, run by a specific group of cars, doing something nobody expected. Naturally, the internet jumped to the obvious conclusion, that Hamlin had been experimenting with something risky right before the playoffs and got burned for it. Hamlin shut that down directly. He said the setup wasn't some secret gamble. It was borrowed. Other teams, specifically 2311, had run this exact combination roughly 20 times or more across multiple cars with no issues at all. Hamlin has never found his rhythm at Iowa since it joined the Cup schedule, so he leaned on a proven setup that had worked well for his alliance partners at that track. It wasn't reckless. It was logical. He even took full ownership of the call, saying bluntly that he couldn't figure out that racetrack on his own, so he put someone else's winning formula into his car. But here's where it went sideways. When the crew installed the borrowed setup, they asked Hamlin one more question: did he want the brakes to match too? Because if he wanted the full 2311 package, the brakes were noticeably different from what he normally ran. Hamlin's answer was simple: if it worked for them, it would work for him. That single decision is the reason the entire weekend unraveled. Once the team dug into what went wrong afterward, the verdict was clear. It wasn't the rotors. It wasn't the calipers. Everything on the car matched what every other team was running, except the brake pads. Hamlin's team believes they simply got a bad batch. And that's where NASCAR's rulebook becomes the real antagonist of this story. Under normal circumstances, NASCAR is fairly flexible about brake components between qualifying and race day. Teams can bleed their brake lines with no penalty. They can swap cracked rotors and treat it as a safety fix. Calipers, brake lines, master cylinders, all changeable, because those are parts NASCAR mandates and single sources for every team. If one of those fails, that's on NASCAR, and they let you fix it with a rear-of-field penalty attached. Brake pads are the one exception. Teams choose their own pads, NASCAR doesn't supply them, so a bad pad isn't treated as equipment failure. It's treated as the team's own mistake. And once you're through inspection, you cannot change them. Not overnight, not before the race, not even if you volunteer to accept a punishment for doing it. The only legal path is a lengthy pit stop behind the wall after the race has already started. Hamlin summed up the trap in blunt terms: brake pads are the one thing you're never allowed to change early, penalty or not, so if you discover a defect, you're simply stuck with it. To his credit, Hamlin didn't pretend the rule was pointless. He understood exactly why it exists. If teams were free to swap pads after qualifying, everyone in the garage would run a soft, aggressive pad for one fast lap and then bolt on a durable race pad before the green flag. The rule shuts that loophole completely. Hamlin's issue wasn't that the rule exists, it's that it has no exit ramp for a genuine safety problem. So he went to the hauler and started negotiating, and at every step, he was the one raising his own punishment. First, he asked to change the pads and simply start at the rear, the standard accepted penalty in NASCAR. Denied. Then he escalated further and offered to start on pit lane instead, one of the harshest starting spots available to any driver in the sport. NASCAR's response wasn't about the danger, it was about the paperwork. That's simply not how the rule is written, they told him. Hamlin pushed back, insisting this wasn't about gaining a strategic edge, it was about keeping his car from blowing a rotor or sliding straight into a wall. He even said he wished the rulebook had an asterisk at the bottom that simply read, "But we will use common sense." Still not enough. So Hamlin went further one more time, start on pit lane at Iowa, and start dead last the following week too. 2 races of punishment for one bad set of brake pads. His logic was simple, a penalty that severe would stop anyone from trying to abuse the system, while still giving a team a legitimate way out when something genuinely breaks. NASCAR turned that down as well. That's when Hamlin asked the question that ended up traveling across the entire sport. What happens if he simply refuses to drive the car at all? According to Hamlin, the answer he got back was that NASCAR would make up a penalty, and it would be worse than anything he'd face by just going out there and changing the pads under green flag conditions. Hamlin's reaction was almost resigned. Fine, he said, then he'd just drive slower and take the laps down if the brakes failed completely. That line, "we would make up a penalty," is what set off the entire conversation across NASCAR media. And NASCAR didn't stay quiet about it. Communications VP Mike Ford addressed it directly, pushing back on the idea that officials invented anything on the spot. According to Ford, NASCAR already has discretionary penalties built into the rulebook for situations exactly like this. If Hamlin's team had ignored the directive and swapped the pads anyway, that would have counted as disobeying NASCAR, which triggers a discretionary penalty NASCAR could size however it saw fit, a rear-of-field drop, a multi-lap penalty, something harsher. Ford insisted that's different from inventing a brand new rule out of thin air, even if Hamlin framed it that way on his podcast. Ford also revealed something that explains exactly why NASCAR held the line so firmly. In the Monday debrief meeting, he asked officials a hypothetical, on a scale of 1 to 10, how badly would the rest of the garage have reacted if NASCAR had let the number 11 team change their brake pads before the race? One official said 10. The chief inspector said 11. In other words, NASCAR wasn't just protecting a technicality. They were protecting the entire garage from a fairness explosion, because letting one team bend the pad rule, even for a legitimate safety concern, opens a door that every other team would immediately try to walk through. None of that made Sunday any easier for Hamlin. His crew tried one last fix that morning, adjusting the cooling ducts, which wasn't approved and cost him another rear-of-field penalty, though by that point it barely mattered since he'd already qualified deep in the field. Hamlin admitted this was the worst mental state he'd ever carried into a race. He said he genuinely thought he was done before it even started, and had mentally shifted his goal from competing to simply surviving, hoping for a top 25 finish and a handful of cautions to bail him out. Instead, his brake pedal went straight to the floor by lap 3. Briscoe held on longer before hitting the same wall of unpredictable braking, describing a pattern where the pedal would come back for 5 or 6 laps and then vanish again without warning. Both drivers spent the entire race pumping the brakes nonstop, white-knuckling every single corner without knowing whether the car would actually stop when they needed it to. And somehow, it worked out. Hamlin finished 5th. Briscoe finished 6th right behind him. His own teammate, Gibbs, took the win. Hamlin later admitted that surviving with a good finish was honestly beyond what he expected walking in, crediting his crew for constantly adjusting the car so he could manage the corners for all 350 laps. The twist in all of this is that the disaster barely slowed him down in the standings. Hamlin arrived at Iowa with an 84-point lead over Tyler Reddick. He left with a 103-point lead over a brand new second-place driver, because Reddick got collected in an early wreck and finished dead last, dropping him all the way to 4th. 7 more drivers were mathematically eliminated from regular season title contention that same weekend. Only 3 drivers can still catch Hamlin, and he's now within reach of locking up the regular season championship, and the seeding advantage that comes with it, before the playoffs even begin. The rulebook itself hasn't changed. Nothing was rewritten Sunday night. The next driver who discovers a bad batch of brake pads after qualifying will be standing in that exact same hauler, making the exact same case, and NASCAR has made clear they're comfortable giving the exact same answer. Both Chris Gale and fellow crew chief James Small have publicly said the brake pad policy needs another look purely on safety grounds. Hamlin isn't asking for a free pass, he's asking for a door, some kind of penalty severe enough to stop anyone from gaming the system, while still giving a team a way out when the problem is real. So here's the real question at the center of all of it. Was NASCAR simply protecting the integrity of a rule that exists for good reason? Or did that 11 out of 10 answer prove that the rulebook bends the second it becomes politically inconvenient not to? Drop your take in the comments. Rules are rules, or NASCAR needs that safety asterisk Hamlin was asking for. If you enjoyed breaking this one down, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more NASCAR news, race breakdowns, and everything happening in the Cup Series all season long.